Hi everyone, thank you for a terrific day so far. I am the lucky last and you'll nearly be free. So I have the great fortune of telling stories for a living. And I've seen firsthand how potent stories can be in influencing behaviour and even shifting policy. And I've come to understand that the world is awash with stories. We're all swimming in stories. Every single one of us woke up this morning and had a story playing in our head about who we are. And that then impacts the way we interact with others throughout our day. Are they stories that limit us, or are they stories that expand us and give us confidence? The organisations we work with, they also have their own story. And we can see that countries have their own story. We're seeing it playing right out at the moment in the Middle East. Two stories, two countries going head to head. So what I've learnt is that stories shape culture, culture shapes leaders, leaders shape policies, and policies shape the system. But it all starts with a story. And I'll give you two quick examples. At the end of the 18th century, the morality of the transatlantic slave trade was being questioned right around the world. And the abolitionists chose to depict the horrors of slavery with a single image that was accompanied by a story. And it showed the horrors of what the slaves were put through during the transportation process and how the men were often shackled for the 6-week journey to avoid insurrection. Now, the idea for the abolitionists was to influence legislation and change the regulations. But 14 years later, this image with a story was replicated more than 200,000 times around the world, in magazines, in newspapers, on lampposts. And it actually ended up contributing to the end of the institution of slavery itself. It was seen as probably the first viral story that led to systemic change. In 1983, this film was released, The Day After, which depicted the aftermath of a nuclear war between America and the Soviet Union. It was watched by more than 100 million Americans and is still one of the most watched television movies in history. The audience were encouraged to phone in with any concerns they had. There was a panel with Carl Sagan and Kissinger after the film. But one person that was watching the film that night was the recently elected President Ronald Reagan. And Reagan said that this one story, this one film, changed his prevailing thought on the policies of nuclear at the time. He shared the film with his Joint Chiefs of Staff, who were ashen-faced when they saw it. He then sent it to Gorbachev, who then showed it to millions of Russians. And just 4 years later, the two men signed a proliferation treaty that actually de-escalated the missiles that both countries had. Stories shape culture, culture shapes leaders, leaders shape policies, but policies shape the system. What I want to talk today about is the most important story of all, I believe. The grand narrative that we all operate and take part in every single day, in which most of us aren't even aware. It is the story of our economy, and it is a story that we can change at any moment. This story informs our design, it informs our technology, it informs the way we relate to each other, and in particular, it informs how we relate to the living world. But this story has taken us to the brink now of an unimaginable crisis. And so our survival depends on us telling a new story. You see, the current story is based on a wound. It's based on scarcity. Anthropologists and researchers say that two things happened when we shifted from a hunter-gatherer species into an agrarian civilization, agricultural civilization. The first was we changed our relationship with nature. When you have to yoke your oxen and whip your oxen every single day, it changes your relationship with nature. And if you don't whip that oxen and your neighbour does and they build up a caloric surplus, you're incentivized to keep whipping that oxen, and so things change. But the second thing that happened is that we moved from abundance into scarcity. And once we have scarcity, we generate fear, we generate ego, we generate a sense of the other, of hoarding, of domination. And this ego led to tribal warfare. It led to wars, it led to fiefdoms, to kingdoms, to monopolies, to the geopolitical tensions that we still see today. It led to the rise of religions, which put a god outside and above us, which led to a European expansion throughout the world that decimated indigenous cultures. And it led to a scientific revolution that saw human beings as separate and superior to nature. Consider the words of Francis Bacon, the father of modern science. We must hound nature in her wanderings. We must put her in constraints. We must enter her every hole and corner. Make her your slave. Subdue her. Shake her to your foundations. This is the story upon which we have built an entire civilization. Is it little wonder we are doing to the planet what we are currently doing? For point of a juxtaposition, some of you might have heard of a very famous story about a man named Admiral Zheng, who 50 years before Columbus began his escapades, took a fleet of 27,000 men on 300 ships around the world. But the cultural story of China at that time saw human beings as reverent guests of nature. So Zhang and his armada didn't go and conquer other tribes or decimate cultures. They exchanged the wonders of the natural world. They took their own animals and spices and jewels to these tribes and brought back giraffes and zebras because their story was different to the one that Columbus spread 50 years later. And so what kind of civilization could we have built if this had been the prevailing story instead of the one we have now? I think it's fair to say we can probably all feel that the current story is coming to an end. We feel an unravelling. It looks like a cost of living crisis. It looks like an ocean full of plastics. It looks like climate change, which is direct feedback from the planet telling us that our story doesn't serve us anymore. It looks like the geopolitics we're seeing right now, the fractured and fragmented democracy. Because this story was built at a time of ecological stability, endless available finance, endless resources to consume and extract. And yet now we find ourselves in a period of ecological instability. We're hitting up against material boundaries. Our governments are crippled with debt. So we have to tell a new story. We're being forced to tell a new story that is more befitting of the times that we find ourselves in now. And personally, I think it's a great privilege to be around at this moment. I think people will look back at this time in a few hundred years and go, imagine being alive then. These people were transitioning their energy systems, moving to circular economies, changing agriculture. What a time to be alive. So all of us have to take that responsibility and ask ourselves, what words are we going to contribute to the new story? What sentences? Some of us might even want to write a whole bloody chapter. So given the theme of this conference, I want to talk about what I think are the 3 essential technologies we're going to need to start telling this new story. The first one is the obvious one. It's the man-made tech. But how do we create technology with the values of the new story embedded in it instead of the old story? And I want to show you a terrific example now. It's a story I filmed a few years ago in Bangladesh, which is ostensibly a renewable setup, a microgrid, with one piece of technology that I think could be transformative for the world.
The setup is quite simple. Any home that has solar panels and a battery can buy this special box, which connects them to another house with the same setup. The box allows the buying or selling of energy between the homes. But it gets better.
There is still a segment of the population that still can't afford to buy a solar home system. So instead of doing that, if they can just buy a small soul box, they can just buy energy when they need it. You fill up your soul box with money. As you keep using energy, it deducts money.
What this means is that all the boxes can connect to each other to form a microgrid. It's like a water tank of community energy that people can give to or take from. The beauty is that this microgrid can then connect to the adjacent village's microgrid, and the network becomes stronger and stronger. there's a mimicking of nature here, isn't there? Like in the way that cells multiply and form something and strengthen. Yeah,
That's a great analogy. You have one solar home system, you interconnect with your neighbors, you make it 50. Slowly you interconnect villages. Once you've collected 100 villages, you can hook it up to the grid. You can sell to the grid. Forget buying from it. You become the primary energy generation source for the country. So the idea is we are like a swarm of bees or a swarm of fish that move together, pool in all our energies together to run bigger loads.
So what's terrific about that energy system is obviously that it's localized, so it moves us away from centralized, monopolized energy systems and providers and moves into more localized energy. The advantage of that obviously is that a lot of the money from people buying and sell their energy stays within the community. It doesn't get shifted off to some kind of renewable energy billionaires. And there's also the resilience piece, that obviously if you're connected to the main grid, and we are going to experience more geopolitical shocks, more climate shocks in the future, that you have a resilience in your own community with your energy supply. So of course, this is not going to be appropriate for everywhere in the world, but it's already starting to happen in Australia. We're changing policies, changing the design of our grid so that our suburbs can act like microgrids. With community batteries, local batteries, and even the battery in your EV, there is a future very soon where you'll get paid by the grid for the storage in your EV. That is a completely different looking system. That is a completely different story. I just want to clear something up very quickly before I move on, and that is that there's a lot of talk about this kind of renewable energy infrastructure. Gosh, it's going to be so extractive. There's so much mining and damage that's going to be done, and that's absolutely true. The International Energy Agency, the IEA, says we're going to need 28 million tonnes of materials to build a renewable economy by 2040, including EVs. So that's lithium and silicon, copper, all those materials, 28 million tonnes. But currently, we are extracting 15 billion tonnes in coal, oil and gas, a story that we don't hear about. 535 times more mining and extraction than what would be required to build a renewable future. And again, this comes back to storytelling. The fossil fuel companies were the biggest of the 21st centuries, huge, and are still very wealthy today. They have been brilliant at constructing a story, shifting culture that delays the action that's required to move to this better future. Again, this is the potency of storytelling. The second quick man-made example of tech I want to show you is happening in Taiwan. Some of you might be following the Taiwan story. It's quite extraordinary. In 2014, a group of activists went and sat in Parliament House in Taiwan, and they set up a live stream event to broadcast right around the country where they could interview politicians and get a sense of what was going in their country. And this took off and became a great success. 2 years later, a new president came in, a prime minister into Taiwan, and he sought out the lead activist, a woman named Audrey Tang, and said, I really loved what you did there around that broadcasting. I'm going to make you the digital minister. And she's helped him revamp the way that their government works online. There's much more transparency around their budgeting. They live stream policy discussions. And what Audrey's done is partnered with environmental agencies and science and transport, and they put out 13,000 sensors around the country in waterways and in industrial areas. And every resident has an app on their phone, and they can see when the safety levels are passed in the water and the atmosphere. And the idea is that it doesn't matter which political party is in power, when it comes to clean air, when it comes to clean water, can we just rely on data? It shouldn't be politicized. So it's a great example of regenerative democracy, regenerative tech that creates that governance. The second tech I want to talk about is a tech that's been developing for billions of years. And it's a tech that we have neglected from the old story. And it's the beautiful tech of nature. Now, given all the problems we're facing with biodiversity collapse and trying to get the carbon out of the atmosphere, this is the tech we need to be enhancing and working with rapidly. I give you the mighty seagrass, which some of you might not know much about. But this photo here is the oldest living organism in the world. It's a patch of seagrass in the Mediterranean that is 200,000 years old. And its great strength is that because it's been sitting there, turtles and other fish have been eating the grass, it's been pulling carbon out of the water and out of the atmosphere. And it sits on 36 feet of topsoil, 10 meters high of soil underneath this seagrass. It has extraordinary abilities to pull carbon into the atmosphere. The second tech here is the Azolla fern, this tiny little fern. 50 million years ago, we had double the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that we have right now. And this little fern in the North Sea bloomed and pulled out about half of the carbon. It's responsible. When people go for oil in the North Sea, they're digging up decomposed azolla fern. So how do we work with this fern again? And the other advantage is it pulls nitrogen out of the atmosphere. So there are farmers now experimenting with putting seeds in the rivers. In the Mississippi, this has happened recently. The seeds grow, they pull the nitrogen out of the atmosphere, they pull the carbon. The farmers then collect the azolla ferns, and it's a really high source of omega-3s to give to their livestock. So brilliant use of nature to create multiple benefits using the tech of nature. And some of you will be familiar with the might of seaweed as well. Seaweed is one of the fastest growing organisms in the world now. 0.5 metre a day seaweed can grow. And when it's growing that fast, it is turbocharged, pulling that carbon out of the atmosphere. It's also alkalizing the water, creating a habitat for all the marine life. And as we've seen recently, it can be used as a healthy food for us, as plastics, and increasingly as fibres. In fact, we partnered with an organisation in Australia last year to make the world's first 100% biodegradable seaweed hoodie. So you can literally put it in your veggie garden when you're finished wearing it and grow your veggies with it. And we're selling those to different corporates to try and raise money for scientists to regrow all the crayweed in Sydney Harbour, because we decimated it in the 70s, but now we've got corporate groups going out every Friday, getting into the water and regrowing and replanting that crayweed. And the third tech I want to talk about, which I think is arguably one of the most important techs, is us, the human tech. Arguably one of nature's most dazzling creations. And we forget that we are nature sometimes. And perhaps we have evolved with this incredible mind and communication and these big hearts and these hands that work to be custodians of this planet, to represent nature and do its work. But this is that wound we talked about before, the wound with which we build our civilization. That wound is mass consumption, the need for more and more that's causing climate change. That wound is a billionaire that needs 10 billion or 100 billion. That wound is a company that wants to get out and disrupt and break shit and be the fastest into the market. That's not coming from a healed place. And when anthropologists looked at the early hunter-gatherer tribes, they found that the men, in particular, the young boys that had that trait, a bit of psychopathy, quite narcissistic, they'd often be ridiculed or ostracized from the group because they knew how it would affect the equilibrium. In the Lakota tribes, they often killed that person who showed those traits, or at least they sent the boys out into the forest for a few days to learn about themselves and interact with nature. We reward that trait. We often make them the CEO of a company, not all, but some CEOs. We make them the president. We give them the keys to the kingdom and let them set the rules of the game. That can't be part of the news story. And especially as men, we need to take responsibility for how we're behaving. I had the great privilege a few months ago of attending a men's retreat with 100 different men. And there was nothing woo-woo, nothing woke nonsense about it. It was men showing extraordinary courage, owning their flaws, owning where they could be better husbands, better fathers, and where they've let themselves down. And what struck me that day was that those same men are objectifying the divine mother, how we treat nature. We're objectifying women in our own lives, and we're objectifying the divine woman that is our planet. A few weeks ago, I had the great privilege of heading here. I'm going to talk about the sacred divine. Spending a few weeks in Antarctica, it's impossible to describe. In fact, I think I said it's where adjectives go to die. Because you say it's incredible, no. It's amazing, no. There just aren't words for how special this place is. But even in this remote ice kingdom at the bottom of the world, our old story has already infiltrated here. So the warmer waters that we're creating, all the heat that's being trapped in the system, is getting underneath the ice, and Antarctica is losing about 400 million tonnes of ice a day. And because of that warmer water, there is evaporation now, and for the first time in recorded history, Antarctica is getting rain. It never rains in Antarctica, so all the Gentoo penguin chicks that have evolved for the snow and the ice, many of them aren't surviving because of the downpours that are happening now in Antarctica. So we need to be honest with where we're actually at. Like we're on the precipice. And we all have a decision to make. What role are we going to play? Are we going to all just sort of go along in this system for the next 10 years or so and slowly watch it start to unravel? With a shared agreement that our children are going to have a really difficult future? Or are we going to roll up our sleeves and take on the admittedly difficult task of redesigning and regenerating our civilization? It's a big ask. But what gives me hope is the extraordinary amount of people around the world that are starting to write this news story. We don't hear about them because our information environment, our information ecology is just as polluted as our oceans and our atmospheres. But when you do sort through, you can't help but be moved what some people are doing right now around the world. And the second reason that gives me hope is the non-linearity of change. I'm sure many of you in the room have been through something really disturbing or emotionally painful in your lives. I've been through something in the last year and a half. And when we are brought to our knees, it's extraordinary what can happen in those moments. The random things that come in, the lack of rational thought, the miracles that can occur when we are open and surrendered. And perhaps, collectively, that's what we need to go through. Maybe humanity needs to be brought to its knees a little for us to actually snap ourselves out of this reverie, of this limbic dopamine hijack system that we're in, to start telling this news story. If you don't know where to start, if you're really lost, you think, gosh, I don't know what to do, we've created a website called theregenerators.org. You can go here, you hit that button, start regenerating, and we ask you what you're interested in, what you're passionate about, how much time you've got, you want to give some money, and we'll give you 10 or 12 things that you can do to get started. It's a database full of regenerative ideas and solutions from right across the world. If you're a business, there's 12 regenerative actions for your business. You can start going there just to spark some ideas and curiosity. And if you're a teacher, just yesterday we released 100 free cross-curriculum lesson plans for all year levels and all ages, 100, that we want community groups to use, that we want people to use. So there's no excuses to not find that thing, to find that sentence that you're going to contribute to in the new collective story that we need to tell. So I'll leave you with a story I made recently, a couple of years ago, that tries to summarize everything that I've just said here today and tries to depict and inspire people into saying, hey, we're all here for a reason in this moment, and we need to shift from that scarcity story, that degenerative story, to a story of regeneration and to a story of abundance. So I'll show you this film now, and given we're in a concert stadium, tech wizards, could you turn up the volume a bit? Let's go out with a bang.
We are being called to come together.
We're all being called.
We are being called to come together.
To come together, to connect.
To connect, and to regenerate.
Regenerate.
To connect and to regenerate.
This is a call to the citizens of this planet. What is regeneration?
What is regeneration?
Regeneration puts life
Life to the center of every act and every decision.
We've inherited an economic system that is extractive and degenerative.
Vital connections have been severed between human beings and nature.
This disconnection and degeneration has brought us to the brink of an unimaginable crisis.
Degeneration is stealing the future.
Regeneration is healing the future.
A regeneração é o único caminho a seguir.
The only path forward. Regeneration means infusing our towns and our cities with nature.
Rewilding our towns and cities.
Transportation that cleans the air and calms the spirit.
Cleans the air and
Calms the spirit.
Regeneration brings our soils back to
Our
life.
soils back to life.
Regeneration creates locally operated renewable energy systems everywhere.
To enable people to take the energy transition into their own hands and make the planet clean.
Regeneration means bringing First Nations knowledge to the forefront.
Embracing indigenous wisdom.
Indigenous story and indigenous voices.
Essential knowledge systems that we need to live in harmony and address the crisis.
Regeneration means giving the young people the power to shape their own future.
This is what democracy looks like. Empowered community
Regeneration means restoring our planet's ecosystem.
Allowing the living world to flourish once more.
To me, regeneration means...
To me, regeneration means love.
Protection.
Harmony.
Resilience.
Loving the life that we've been given on this beautiful planet.
Regeneration means knowing the people in my neighborhood
and living in a safe, strong, and caring community.
Regeneration benefits every person, every living being.
Respeitar, conservar, proteger, cuidar.
We can use what we have in our unique way to take care of this place that we love.
Cuidar.
Our home. Regeneration is how we can do that. We're all in this together, man. This is a call to the citizens of this planet who want a better future for all living beings. A call to the regenerated.
I am striking for climate justice and telling the truth in Russia, but it's dangerous to be a climate activist.
I power all my concerts with 100% renewable energy.
I'm working with farmers to find the best ways to increase soil health and increase biodiversity.
I hold our government accountable for their continuous climate denial and undoubtable support for the fossil fuel industry.
I hike mountains in high heels to build queer community in the outdoors and to advocate for our one true queen, Mother Nature.
We are all being called to come together, to connect, and to regenerate. See, we're moving from an industrial civilization to an ecological civilization. We're all here, alive in this moment, to make this happen. You are the regeneration.
You are the regeneration.
You are the regeneration.
You are the regeneration.
We are the regeneration.
We are the regeneration.
We are the regeneration.
We are the regeneration.
Somos a floresta, somos os rios. Nós somos a regeneração.
This is the regeneration.
The dude abides regeneration. Thank you. Cheers.